Since this panel is about American sports, it's obviously not about artificial intelligence, and with apologies to my colleagues up here, may not be about intelligence at all. So it's something that we'll maybe spend a little more time on Q&A, since everybody can have an opinion on this one. This is not nuclear proliferation either. Joe, in his aperitif yesterday, said that he was going to make sure that this was a brawl. And so my role here really should be not so much the moderator, but as a referee. So I've come prepared. And I will blow the whistle when Joe gets out of order, which is frequently, by the way, I got to tell you, especially late last night on the second bottle of wine. We're going to talk about, really this is about, all started by Joe's book, Indentured, and about the NCAA, which Joe's very fond of, and the issue of whether amateur athletes in college athletes in football and basketball should be paid. To me, this question really has two sides. One is the very complicated legal issues about this cartel, as Joe feels, and a trust law, and whether or not this issue can be dealt with in the courts, which Ekow really feels I'm disadvantaging Ekow because he's going to kill Joe legally, and he's been prepared to do that. But I think we ought to leave the legal issues aside and not talk about those today. But Ekow's also the romantic in this one. He's the one who's going to talk about the values of American sports, which we want to hear about. But I think it is also filled not just with legal issues, but moral, economic, political, and social issues. And I think that's what we ought to be talking about today. So you and me and do that. Okay. Since a lot of this is about issues of hypocrisy and integrity, I thought we might just spend a minute to begin with and talk about the American swimmers in Brazil, which raised some of those sports issues like that.
That just goes under the category of idiocy.
Certainly not intelligent. I mean, we don't have to, if anyone wants to say anything about that.
I don't know what there is to say.
32-year-old guys in doing youthful pranks, right?
Well, I love Brazil, and I've been there. I've been to Rio twice in my life, and I know how sensitive they are as a country about their reputation, and especially about the crime there. And so, this so fed into their worst nightmare that it's hard to imagine an athlete saying something that would be as damaging to their self-esteem, which is why they're so mad now, and why they've actually arrested 2 of the swimmers.
Well, I think we're on a plane now coming home. One of them having paid $10,000 this morning in a fine, which is going to Brazilian sports, and we'll see what and the USOC has issued a kind of apology and then announced they were going to investigate the whole thing after everybody's out of Brazil. The games are over and everybody's home, then we'll do an investigation. Ekow, do you want to say anything about this or just skip it?
No, I'm also amused at the ability of very talented people to decry their 32-year-old mistakes as youthful.
Remember that.
Yeah.
So let us start with, since Joe's put the issue on the table with his book, Joe will open, and Ekow has done Joe, as everybody knows, is a great writer. Who's for me, his op-eds in the New York Times were consistently the most interesting and challenging because they were always fact and research based, not just random opinion. And now is with the because I guess of this adventures now with the sports section in New York, but it still is of the Times and still incredibly provocative and a great writer. And Ekow is a distinguished professor at Cardozo Law School who is going to take the posture of romantic in this debate. So Joe, why don't you open up and state the case?
I will. I want to first, though, you used the word amateurism. What's an amateur? And I just want to note for the record that every college athlete who wins a medal in the Olympics is getting paid. And the NCAA has ruled that they can keep that money.
Paid by the USOC, right?
Yeah.
They get a reward from the U.S. Olympic Committee.
Right. But if a college football player gets $5 from a buddy, he's in violation of the rules. It's not, the question isn't whether you're getting paid by the school or not, although that's part of the question. It's the rules are you can't get paid. You can't get anybody. You can't have an endorsement. You can't do this. Let me start.
I'm sorry, I was supposed to, we don't have technology here, we didn't rank technology, but they did ask me to have everybody express an opinion before and after to see how you've been moved by this discussion. So could we have a showing of hands of those who think that college athletes in these two sports should be paid, put the details aside, the case that Joe's going to make. All those in favor of that, would you just raise your hands? Let's say that's 20, and those opposed? Okay, that's about 10. Okay, Joe, excuse me, go ahead.
He's going to take that as a challenge, I can tell you. I got interested in this, as I said yesterday, about 5.5 years ago. And the primary motivator was not something I wrote about money or economics. It was the way a Connecticut freshman named Ryan Boatwright was being treated by the NCAA. He was not being allowed to play, and the reason he was ineligible to play was because his mother had accepted money from a friend to go on his college tours. This was a violation of amateurism. His mother had taken money from somebody that the NCAA said she shouldn't take money from. Single mother, raising 4 kids, wants to see the universities that her son might attend. Something most parents want to do. What ensued was an investigation of her, which I found out about, that was beyond the pale. It was beyond the pale, the things they did to her. Forcing her to come up with, show every check she had written over the course of 4 or 5 years while he was in high school, having her justify every bit of cash that she had put in her bank account. She became depressed. She lost her job, and then he had started playing basketball, and he was ruled ineligible a second time because the NC decided they wanted to go back and reinvestigate her. And this happened while he was going to play at Notre Dame, which was only 2 hours from Aurora, Illinois, and it was terrible. When you start to look into the NCAA, it is true, this is not the most important issue in the world. But you just can't believe how this organization operates and how it deprives athletes of rights that any other college student might have and does have. There are restrictions on whether they can transfer to another school. There was just a case where a second-string Alabama football player graduated from the school, and the coach, Nick Saban, didn't want to let him transfer to Georgia. He was a graduate, even though he had 1 year left. There's a million things like that, and they're all crazy, and they're all wrong. And that then got me into the issue of money. And I saw it from the start as an issue about rights. So athletes don't have due process rights. They don't have rights of privacy. But they also don't have economic rights that anybody else in the society has. And yet, they are at the heart of a multi-billion-dollar industry that includes multi-billion-dollar contracts, ESPN contracts for the college playoffs. It is an industry like any other industry that's trying to maximize revenues. And the coaches get paid millions, the conferences get paid millions, the assistant coaches get paid. At Alabama, the defensive coordinator makes $1.5 million, so that's an assistant coach. There's something wrong, it seems to me, to have this industry with a labor force that makes nothing. Many of these athletes are only invited into the school for the purpose of playing basketball or football, for generating money for the school. Many of them would probably be better off in the minor leagues, but we don't have a minor leagues in basketball or football. We have this. And it's an entertainment, it's a form of entertainment that millions and millions of people love. It's not going to go away. And as a practical matter, the players should get some of the bounty. That's my core argument.
So as Joe knows, well, actually, first I should say Joe's promised a brawl, so I will try to hold up my end of the bargain. But it is customary at the beginning of matches to touch gloves, and so I do want to say that, look, I think it's a hard issue, and I think lots of people of goodwill are trying hard to figure it out, and I don't want to pretend that I have some simple answer. I hope my answer is slightly more right, and that's the best I can hope for. So as Joe knows, I'm not here to defend the NCAA. I think the organization often does just awfully stupid things. The list of rules are Byzantine and ridiculous, and though it's often painted even worse than it is, it's not by much, since the organization is actually often terrible. So mine is not a position of defending the NCAA. What I am here to defend is amateurism in college sports. Now, I only have 3 simple points. I think Joe's plan would be okay if it weren't 1, bad for universities, 2, bad for sports, and 3, bad for the athletes, right? Other than that, it's fine, right? So first of all, Joe's plan of commoditizing athletics in universities would turn our universities into literally minor league athletic venues. This is a horrible idea. Look, we pay money to subsidize our universities because we believe in them as universities. And if what we're going to do is repair what's wrong with them, we should try to preserve the things that are valuable about universities and not collapse in the face of difficulty, not give up on the project that is our university. I have no problem with people making millions of dollars in playing minor league sports. I just don't particularly want to subsidize that by turning my University of Michigan into essentially an employer of minor league athletes. If somebody else wants to run that business, that is fine, right? But that is not the business of a university. And that, by the way, has a sad, sad effect of just giving up on the things that are actually valuable in physical activity about education. 2, it's bad for sports. One of the things that Joe actually elides, and I think this is unfair, is that actually it is not at all clear, and I know it doesn't sound very graceful to say this, but it is not at all clear that the athletes are the point of college education, or excuse me, of college sports. This is not at all clear. Look, let me let you in on a little secret. Every single athlete that plays college sports is not as good as a bunch of kids who just graduated but weren't good enough to make the pros. The worst NBA D-League could beat the national championship team every year, maybe minus one of Kentucky's great years, right? The worst baseball team in the minor leagues could beat the college championships, right? The minor league football leagues where they exist in Europe and elsewhere could crush the national title team. Here's the point. People are not watching these sports because they want the highest level athletics. If they wanted the highest level athletics, they would watch pro sports. Pro sports is where the best athletes are. If they wanted the second highest level athletics, they would watch minor leagues, and then the next minor league, and then the next. No. Do you know why 110,000 people go to Ann Arbor every football weekend to watch? It's because they want to cheer for student athletes. They are there precisely because these young men and women are the young men and women who walk the same halls they did. It's precise, and by the way, though we've been told not to bore people with antitrust law, this is one of the things the law recognizes, that you're allowed to have anti-competitive behavior if the product can't exist without it. The very product that's being sold. Again, look, Michigan is only a few miles down the road from the Detroit Lions stadium. Now, this is a terrible example because I can assure you as a Detroit Lions fan, there are many, many, many reasons not to watch the Lions. Nonetheless, the Lions will never sell as many tickets as Michigan. If you want, just for your own fun, Google the top 10 largest stadiums in the country. They're all college stadiums. And the reason is because people are interested in watching college sports. Now, Joe is very confident that if you start commercializing this project, it will have no damaging effects on the actual project. I don't have nearly the confidence he does, in particular because we have, it's not fanciful. We have real world examples of minor league sports, and it turns out they're not very popular. They don't make any money, nobody goes and watches. And the closer you push college sports to minor league sports, the more dangerous I think it is actually for the sports themselves. But look, the real reason we care about this is because ultimately this is terrible for the athletes. We invite these, Joe's right, we invite these young men, right, and let's be serious. In terms of commodification, we're talking about two sports, basketball and football, right? So we invite these young men, often from communities where they are otherwise disadvantaged. Not always, I don't want to overstate it, but often, right? Overwhelmingly African American. And we put them through, in often cases, programs that are just built to allow them to play football. And the idea that the way to solve this is to disconnect these young men further from what it means to be an athlete is disgusting. It's offensive. We shouldn't do this, right? And to do this by handing them what? Joe suggested $25,000. I know, when you're 18, $25,000 sounds like a lot of money. The people in this room know better. It's nothing. It's what a Starbucks barista makes. And to trade their futures that cheaply, instead of actually providing them what might matter, an education, the kind of thing that changed my life every day, instead of making them students. So, my suggestion is simple. Let's allow, in boring antitrust ways that we won't talk about, real minor leagues to flourish. The young men who are forced to play a charade that aren't interested in school, fine, I get it. My kids are going to college if I have anything to do with it. But some kids don't want to, some kids aren't built for it, some kids have other goals, some kids go to Juilliard, some kids pursue acting and singing. I understand, there are other things to do. If you are so preternaturally talented that you are meant to be a professional athlete, that is fine. Go play for the minor leagues and I wish you the best. I certainly have nothing against people becoming wealthy athletes. But for everybody else, let's build a system where they're actually college students, where they have a chance at the thing that makes this worthwhile. That is an education that will serve them for the rest of their lives. Last thing I want to say is this. I am being cast here as the romantic, and that is partly true. I am, in fact, a romantic. But don't let people fool you here. This is not a question of romanticism versus practicality. That's just not true. Under either suggestion, we're going to have to put in a lot of time and energy and change the laws to restructure the way college sports works. My suggestion is if we're going to put that kind of energy into the system, let's do it in a way that actually serves these young men. Let's graduate generation after generation of educated young men and educated young black men instead of paying off our guilt cheaply with $25,000 a year.
Okay. So Ekow has just described Division III. That's what he's just described. He hasn't described Division I at all. He hasn't described the realities. He says his beloved Michigan, 107,000 people. Well, Michigan's coach, Jim Harbaugh, just got a $2 million raise, so he now makes $7 million. And college sports, big-time college sports, is the minor leagues. It is the minor leagues now. There is no other minor league that matters. He is completely right that people go to the games, not necessarily for the athletes in particular, although that's not quite true with the Stars, but to root for the school. Money wouldn't change that at all. Look at Kentucky basketball. He brings in 5 mercenaries every year to play for 1 year before they go to the pros, because they have to. They can't go directly from high school, the NBA rules. Does anybody care that they're only there for 1 year in Kentucky when they win a championship? No, they don't care at all. You know, all they care about is winning. Talk about the education. Way, way, way too many of these athletes don't get an education. I'm going to read you something. The University of North Carolina, as you may know, has had the worst academic scandal in the history of college sports that went back 20 years, and there were sham classes for the, given by, of all things, the African American Studies Department, which is just repulsive. And a professor there, a history professor, wrote the following. The deeper problem is that we entice these players to entertain the public and enrich their coaches by performing a vast amount of arduous, dangerous, and unpaid work with the opportunity for free education and the distant chance to go pro as their only compensation. Then we set up conditions which make the education either meaningless or nearly unattainable. To me, this situation is fundamentally immoral. So, do I believe that the players deserve a better chance at an education? Yes, I do. And one of my proposals is a lifetime scholarship, so that the players who don't think about it or while they're playing, or it's too, these are 50-hour-a-week jobs, playing football and basketball. It's not like athletes have a hard row to hoe, and so I'd like to have a lifetime scholarship. I'd also like to have lifetime health care, because that's another thing that the athletes really get cheated on if they get hurt, if they have a sustaining injury, and the school will pay for the first surgery or the second surgery, but at a certain point the school stops. And to say that we are not already commercializing this project, it is completely commercialized in every way. You go to the NCAA Final Four, you're not allowed to bring a cup or a can into the stands unless it's a sponsor. They actually have tables at every entrance where you have to put stuff that's not sponsored by the NCAA so it won't be on television. I mean, come on. It couldn't be more commercial. So all I'm saying, which is really, it's a simple thing. It's a simple thing. Let the athletes participate in the wealth and the enormous wealth that college sports has brought about for everybody else in the system. I don't see how that's different from Natalie Portman acting while she goes to Harvard, or Katie Ledecky taking money from the Olympics. Is Katie Ledecky going to corrupt Stanford because she took $115,000? I don't think so. And the idea that by putting money into the pockets of the people who are making everybody rich, the idea that that's offensive seems crazy to me. It seems the opposite is true. This is what's fair. This is what's right.
So there are a lot of complicated arguments in that. I will notice that actually, it's not even clear that economically this argument is all that viable. I mean, that's actually an argument for another day.
No, we can have that. That's all right.
No, I mean, look, so it just turns out to be true that lots of people work in systems where they generate huge amounts of value for other people, but their particular skill set doesn't generate a huge amount of value, so they don't get paid very much, right? I mean, there are cruel examples of this, like an iPhone worker in China who just gets nothing like what Steve Jobs' wealth is, and then there are examples that are perfectly ordinary, like if you're an associate at a law firm, you get paid well, but you don't get paid what the senior partners get paid because, as a first-year associate, you're more or less interchangeable. So that's, just as a philosophical matter, Joe has some work to do to explain to us why it is that if you're actually a fungible worker, that you should suddenly get an equity stake, especially when the thing you're promised is the education that I actually want to give you. I mean, just notice, by the way, that in the system where we actually focus on providing an education to young men, it's much harder to tell a story about why this is terribly exploitative, right? That's a system where young men are getting good educations in order to play sports, in part to play sports, which we can talk about in a second. But just a couple quick things. Look, Joe and I have big disagreement, but we don't disagree on, in fact, our disagreement is intense because it's focused. I totally agree with him. Of course there should be lifetime scholarships for these students. That's my point, right? The point of what we're trying to give these young people is an education. Lifetime health care, I mean, insofar as if the injury is related to playing the sport, I think I'd be totally, I mean, as you know, you and I have cataloged large places where we agree. But what I do want to say is, look, I'm proposing a system where even if it's true that Michigan commercializes huge amounts of value because people want to watch Michigan sports, imagine a world where that happens to be the case, even though the young people who are clearly going to go pro have been shaved off the system, right? So the most talented kids would go into a minor league system where they can pursue their passions, and rightfully so, right? And if it turns out to be the case that notwithstanding that those unbelievably talented young people have been let pursue their talents in an equitable way, hundreds of thousands of people still want to pay money to watch Michigan sports, then the fact that Michigan commercializes it is no more of a problem than the fact that we live in a capitalist society with really skewed values. That's not a trivial problem, but that's not a particular problem about Michigan sports, right? Nor would it be a problem about exploitation, right? So again, look, I know it's hard for us to remember this, but there are a lot of young people who are much more athletic than we are who are not going to go pro. It's not as though if you allow the sure pros to go play someplace else, there will not be lots of young athletic people to play sports. And people will still want to watch them play sports. And without the corrupt incentive that these kids are certainly going to go pro, schools will have less of an incentive to do anything they can to just have a sham. And students will have less of an incentive to sign up for something without real value, because they'll know that the only real value offered is an education. And if you ask me, what's the better version? Graduating a generation of kids who have real educations and real degrees, while Michigan still makes a huge amount of money, or shaving these young kids off from what it means to be from being actually students. For me, it's an easy choice.
So if we take, let's try and take.
I gotta say one thing. I want to tell you. A first-year associate at a law firm is getting what the market bears. That's what he's getting. It may not be a lot, but he's getting what the market bears.
That's a lot.
And a college athlete is not getting paid because there's a rule, there's an organization that has a rule that says you can't get your market value. So there's a gigantic difference.
So no, that's actually just not clear. Look, no, it really isn't, Joe. You can't say these things with such easy confidence. Look, take a look at the minor league sports. Go take a look. These young people get paid nothing. I'm serious. Look, I don't have to deal in just fanciful hypotheticals. Google what you get paid to be a minor league baseball player or a minor league. I know what it's like to grow up in European soccer leagues.
It depends on who you are. If you're Steven, what's his name, from the Washington Nationals,
of course.
You get paid a lot.
Of course. So there are.
You get paid what the market will bear.
So there is the Drew Henson, who gets $17 million to play third base for the Yankees, right? Turns out to be a bust. I mean, he seems to be a lovely young man, so God bless. No, I mean that, look, the fact that you don't turn out to be a career-changing shortstop doesn't make you a bad person, right? Okay, fine. Of course there will be a few people like this, but there's this great line in Romeo and Juliet, right? You went blind from staring into the sun, and thus failed to notice the beauty of the stars. We look at one or two examples, and we get so focused on them that we lose the fact that all these other young men are real people, real stars, and we're going to blow up the system for the one or two Drew Hensons that get $17 million, right? Meanwhile, by the way, the other young people will not, in fact. I mean, there's a reason why there are one or two kids who get these huge amounts of money, often under the table, whereas most kids don't, because college coaches are well aware.
I want to break this, take it apart with a couple of things. One, the one thing I think you both clearly agree on, we'd all agree on, is it turns out that the NCAA is a miserable organization, okay? Now, if there's all you have to do is, if you get Joe's book and read the first chapter only, which is what Joe described, which is the story of poor Ryan Boatwright and his mother Natasha, it is shocking that this private police force of the NCAA is able to do this to this poor woman. And so the first question is, can you reform? First thing should be to reform the NCAA. And the question is, can you reform those procedures without paying athletes? With just saying that we wouldn't have to enforce it that way.
No, you absolutely could do that. The problem is that it has a culture that's been ingrained since the 1950s, when Walter Byers, 29-year-old sports writer, became the head of the NCAA and turned it into, from a toothless organization to a hugely powerful organization. And that culture is entrenched. Okay. And they don't, and I've actually said this to Mark Emmert, he says, well, my hands are tied, I can't do this, I can't do that, I have to have my membership. And I basically say, the one thing you can do is you can blow up your internal culture and you can become an organization that's rooted in common sense and compassion instead of ruthlessness and rules bound.
I think that's pretty clear that's an outrage and should be dealt with before we even get to the question of paying athletes. The second thing would be that you could reform parts of this funding so that Natasha Boatwright could either take money to go visit schools, which she paid back, by the way. It was a loan.
No.
Right?
They've already changed the rule. It's now not a violation for the parents to get paid to go to that.
Or to go to a game.
They changed the rule. Now it used to be a violation. Now it's not a violation. It used to be a violation if the parents got money to go to the Final Four. Now it's not a violation. Amateurism, as I said, is whatever they say it is.
So the third question
be
to me
fair,
is to
and look, the NCAA, if the NCAA needs defenders, it's not going to get it from me in this way. But to be fair, it is true that parents are actually allowed to go to college campuses with the students. They're just limited to 5 official visits, right? So, Joe, we should get a complete picture, right? I'm not a big defender of the organization, but
I think before we turn it over, the last thing I'd want to say is that the nexus between education and money seems to me critical, and the question we talked about at midnight last night under Too Much Wine was, what's the logical extension? Where do you draw the line? If the issue is all about money, paying these kids, rather than getting an education, why shouldn't we allow Michigan just to hire a group of football players? They don't have to go to class at all.
You should be able to do both. You should be able to get an education and get paid. That's the thing that I have a hard time. I don't see what's corrupting about it. Yeah, I agree that people go to see that the appeal is the idea that you're watching students play. I completely disagree with them, by the way, that if you took the best players away from all the schools, that 100,000 people would still come. We actually have real-world examples of why this is not true, which is baseball and hockey, where they do have minor leagues, and hockey and baseball aren't nearly as big as basketball and football because they don't have the best players. The best players have been siphoned off into the minor leagues. But what I don't understand in his argument is why it's so awful if you put some money in the pockets of the players. What terrible thing is going to happen? Except they won't any longer be the poorest kids on the campus. That's what I don't understand.
Let's go to questions. And the other thing, go ahead.
So, look, I mean, I don't think, look, if we forced upon me the rather silly argument that the first day you give somebody $10, the whole system will fall down, then I will rightfully look ridiculous. What is true is, I think the first time a kid looks up and you ask him, why did you come to Michigan? And he says, they just had a scholarship for me. We go, okay, they had a scholarship and a stipend for me. All right, fair enough. They made me a great offer, but every time we take a step that way, as kids get more and more divorced from choosing your school for the reasons that everybody else chooses colleges, I'm not so confident that you won't slowly untether the connection between student athletes and the universities they actually represent. And I actually think the counterexample is the minor leagues, where people actually don't go watch because people have no real connection to these things. People go and watch because they're connected to their university. It's the #1 reason people always say they go watch. But the second problem I have with this is, look, here's the place in which I am romantic. I actually think sports is a part of education. I think it's not an accident that since 4000 BC, the gymnasium in Athens, in Egypt, that we've always cared for sports being a part of your education. And one of the things that frustrates me is that when other things are lost, people rise to their defense. When we lose chess in the public schools, people notice we've lost something. When we lose violin in the public schools, people notice we've lost something. But when it's the thing that young black men do, it's so easy for us to shrug. Sports doesn't really count. And then it's not surprising that these young men don't feel a part of the college campus, right? The further we take them away from being actual student athletes, it won't be surprising that they feel totally disconnected, that they understand that they're just hired to be there, right? And I find that sad.
You've just raised one of the other questions I was hoping to, but the issue of where race plays into all this, because Taylor Branch in his first great article about this, was Joe Seitz, talked about the NCAA as a plantation, the whole system as a plantation, and which the flip question would it be any different if all these players were white kids from the coal mines and otherwise? But who's got the first question? Peter, and please identify yourselves for Ekow and Joe.
Hi, Peter May. So, two things. First of all, aren't you ignoring the value of the scholarship itself, which, you know, for most of the kids who are playing college sports would not have access to college at all, and you're talking in today's world $50,000, $60,000 to go to any of the big schools. Secondly, isn't the real issue the quality of the education, the way the education is being delivered, the fact that they're given gut courses, that they're structured in a way that the education is so much secondary to playing the sport, that that the way to fix it is not by just paying the students to do exactly what they're doing now, but to change the rules and have them work through, have them actually get an education and be students and have less amount of time being spent on the sport.
Well, that would be great, but that's pretty unrealistic. Kane Coulter, the former quarterback at Northwestern, when he was testifying, you know, they tried to form a union, the football team tried to form a union unsuccessfully. He testified that he wanted to be pre-med. And he realized halfway through his first semester that that was never going to happen because, you know, he couldn't take the courses. He didn't have the time, and the courses didn't come at the right time, and so on and so forth. Shane Battier, the former basketball player, once told me that he majored in religion because it was the only serious major he could take and still play basketball for Duke, because everything else was impossible. I think there's a contradiction in your two questions. Is there value in a scholarship? Yes. In fact, a scholarship is a form of payment. It is a form of payment. I mean, the only real issue isn't whether they should get paid or not. It's how much, really. The scholarship is a form of payment, and yet the education for these big-time programs in football and men's basketball are often so substandard that the athletes wind up majoring in eligibility, as I call it. The academic advisors just shift them around to this class, this class, this class. They make no rhyme or reason, and yet they quote unquote graduate, or they don't, because once their 4 years of eligibility is up, the school really basically loses interest.
So I think Joe's right here in a lot of ways, especially the serious and demoralizing and immoral way in which schools let them major in eligibility. I totally agree with you there. Here's, you know, I've made the point before, but here's the thing that makes me sad. So we view it as unrealistic to reduce the number of practice hours, right, which will not be easy, but can be done, to change the incentive structure so that kids aren't just there to go pro, right, and thus making their education actually valuable for them. But somehow it's totally realistic to blow up something like 100 years of antitrust law, change the payment structure throughout the country, change the country. That's, I mean, you know, we're going to put our energies into something.
Question back there, please. Then the gentleman in the front, then Faye. Or go ahead, let's move our way back.
Hi. One of the points that surprised neither of you made is the extent to which football and basketball and all of these programs subsidize the rest of the athletic programs in schools. Half the students at these colleges are swimmers and fencers and, no, sorry.
No,
in the athletic programs.
The vast majority.
Exactly.
Hundreds and hundreds of young athletes are not playing.
And Notre Dame, the school which I'm most familiar with, is as much money as Notre Dame makes on the football program, Notre Dame does not make money on its athletic program. It funds and subsidizes everything else that happens athletically at the school. And I think that that's something that needs to be factored into what it is that's being generated wealth-wise.
Tell me this. Why should poor black kids who play football and men's basketball subsidize the upper middle class kids who play lacrosse? Why?
I don't think it's an either-or equation. I think the solution to this is that these kids get an education after the 4 years of eligibility is up. That's a no-brainer.
These schools can find the money to build $25 million indoor practice facilities indoor practice for the football team alone. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars on facilities, mostly around football and basketball, not entirely. So, I mean, the idea that the schools, that the revenue generated by football and basketball, it's only right and just that it go to the soccer team, no, I don't agree with that. I think if the University of North Carolina values the soccer team, they should pay for it.
So one of the most important pieces of legislation to be passed to help women, particularly young women, was Title IX. And so as I listened to this discussion, I hope that as we contemplate what changes could come down, that we realize what an incredible impact on creating women leaders that has had. So that aside, there are so many, you know, we keep talking about the 1%. Let's talk about the 1% of the athletes that are really, really, really good. The NCAA rules impact 100% of the athlete. It impacts the volleyball player, it impacts the woman golfer, it impacts, you know, everybody on the team. And so would a reasonable way to start this discussion be to create the top 10 things that the NCAA does that makes it really hard for student athletes to graduate from college, which I think we all agree is the reason they're supposed to be there in the first place. And if we could do that, we would start to see that there are a lot of things that the NCAA does that, with flexibility, the entire athletic regime at every school gets better and the students have a better outcome.
That's hard to disagree with. I guess what I would say is that at the top of my list of NCAA reforms is something slightly different than what you're saying, which I think, you know, I think the lack of due process and the lack of privacy and the lack of an ability to transfer and the lack of an ability to do all sorts of things that other students get to do, I find that really troubling. That bothers me a lot. Title IX, you know, is about equality of opportunity rather than equality of money. And for instance, if you look at most big-time sports schools, you'll see that the skew is still 60-40 or even 75 or even 70-30 in favor of the men's sports. I don't know if you knew that, but that's basically how it's been played out, mostly because football's so expensive.
You look at the women executives in the United States that are under 50, almost all of them played a sport.
I'm just going to emphasize what you're saying. Look, I mean, this is part of what I keep saying over and over, and I think it's very it's very easy. You know, philosophers make easy targets to describe as romantics, but this is part of what I'm saying. I mean, look, with every other sport that doesn't include these two moneymakers, and I get it, the money is so large, it's hard to ignore. I understand that. I'm not naive about that. But with every other sport, we see the value it actually contributes to what it means to be a young student athlete. We see young soccer players come out with life skills and skills, and they're practicing just as hard. Let me tell you, they're working hard, but they're not, they don't necessarily have to have a sham education, right? They're studying chemistry and playing volleyball, and they go on to be young student leaders. And I just wonder why we're so quick to dismiss that for these young black men who I recognize. Why don't those values touch our hearts in the same way? I understand the money is blinding in some ways, but it saddens me that it's so blinding.
I was not using romantic in a depreciating way. I will call you a philosopher from now on.
Yeah, I'd like to start my comment by saying that I am an alumnus of Ohio State University. Having received the top alumnus award a few years ago, so I'm a devout one.
As a Michigan person, I have to say you remain an impressive person despite
Thank you.
this.
I would like to secondarily say that in the 4 years that I was at Ohio State, I did not miss a single home football game because they were very entertaining enterprises. And so let us not, while I appreciate your ideals, let us not forget that those productions are about entertainment. and they are the players. It would be as though we were saying that the producers and the directors deserve to earn everything, and that the actors in this play deserve to just entertain us. And I think Ohio State is unfortunately a very sad example of the kind of system that has prevailed for a very long time. And I was there significantly after the NCAA became as powerful as it is, that it makes certain that its athletes remain eligible for the first 3 years, and in true Ohio State fashion, the fullback carries the team, and after that play is done, they're done with him. This past season, an unprecedented numbers of, starting with Ezekiel Elliott, left the team and went to the major leagues. To suggest that this is not preparation for the major leagues, it seems to me not to look at the evidence. So if we're so in love with sports for the sport's sake and not for the entertainment value, we go to Ohio State football games because we love the thrill of it. We're not thinking about their scholarship when we're in that 107,000 people on Saturday afternoon in Columbus, Ohio. We're thinking about how it thrills our soul to see that scarlet and gray entertaining us. And so I think we need to be clear about it. And if we want to embrace for the good of it, I went to every football game. And so Ohio State's, at my education as a nursing major, was very complete, that I had an opportunity to participate in the golden era of football and basketball at Ohio State. But if we want to go to that and abandon the entertainment value, let's turn it all into intramural sports. And then we will have just simply that we play for the fun of it, for the leadership that it gives us, for all of those wonderful things that we have taught in our mind to be okay with this, and not look at the fact that most of these kids are non-white students. That's the only way that they are there. They struggle while they are there at the same time that they are performing for us. And let us see it for what it is, that it is really not a system that we ought to be proud of or to sustain.
Well, let's take one last vote at the end. For all those who now think that athletes should be paid, can we see a quick show of hands? And all those who would still say no.
Didn't change many minds.
I think there may have been one or two against it, but okay. Thank you all very much.
It was great.
Game's over.